Hi Year 2, it's time for our Tuesday English lesson. If you haven't listened to the chapter A Crane for Grandma, then you need to stop the English lesson now and you need to go and listen to that and then come back to this lesson later because today we're going to be retelling that part of the story, okay? And you're going to be writing that chapter of the story. So you won't be able to do that if you don't know what happens. So if you haven't read that chapter or you haven't listened to me reading that chapter, then you need to go and do that now and then come back. Okay, so stop this video, skedaddle, off you go, and then come back later. For the rest of those that have listened to that chapter or we've read it ourselves, because I know some of you have been and bought the book and are reading along with me and with us, which is great, then we can get straight on with our lesson. All right, first thing I want you to do is I want you to use the pictures on your screen to retell the story so far. And you'll notice that at the end of the story map, there are 3 pictures from our new chapter, A Crane for Grandma. So pause the video and retell the story to somebody now. Well done, Year 2. How did you get on with your retell? Did you try and include detail? Did you try and make it sound exciting? Did you put some great adjectives in there? Did you make some good choices with your verbs? Did you use any similes? I hope so. Okay. Right, so today we're going to retell the chapter, A Crane for Grandma. So the first thing we need to do is we need to think about what happened in this part of the story. Okay, so just like you did on the first slide, I want you to pause the video now, concentrate on these 3 pictures, and really think about when you're retelling this part of the story to somebody about making it sound interesting and exciting, make them want to read to find out what happens next. Okay, so really think about how you are retelling this story and bringing it to life. All right, pause the video and off you go. Well done. I am sure that you thought really carefully about the language that you were using, the words that you were choosing, the way that you were telling the story. Did you think about how you were telling the story? Did you think about your expression? That's a really important part of retelling a story when we're reading it out loud. We need to think about how we use our expression to tell a story in an interesting way that makes somebody want to keep listening. And it's a bit like that when we're writing a story. We need to think about the way that we write it so that the person who's reading it wants to carry on reading it. Because we've all picked up books where we've started reading them and thought, oh, this is a bit boring, this isn't for me. And we've put it down again, haven't we? And we don't want anybody to do that with our writing. So, how are we going to make sure that our writing is great to read? Let's go back and have a think about the writing that you looked at yesterday that was done by Mrs. Shuttleworth and I. Okay, so we had a go at retelling the beginning bit of George's Marvellous Medicine. So up to the chapter where you're carrying on now. So we've done the first part and you're now carrying on from A Crane for Grandma. I asked you yesterday to look at our writing and to pick out some of the bits that you thought made it a great piece of writing. Okay, so I asked you to think about adjectives, adverbs, similes, interesting verbs, conjunctions, different sentence types, and those noun phrases, particularly those expanded noun phrases where we use an object to describe an adjective, to describe an object, don't we? Like a fluffy brown dog, okay, or a tall, skinny grandma. And you used your highlighters and you went through and you found lots of those features in our writing. I've been really impressed with some of the work that's come back to me through our year group email that's shown me how good you are at picking out all of these bits in our writing. And if you can pick it out in somebody else's writing, that means that you should be able to pick it out in your own writing, and you should be able to make sure that it's there in your own writing too. So you need to make sure that if you printed this out, you've got it somewhere near you as you're writing this week, because it'll be a good reminder for you about what we're looking for in your writing. So what I'm looking for when I read your writing. You might also have picked out some bits in mine and Mrs. Shuttleworth's retell that you thought could be improved. And you know what? If you did, that's fantastic. Because it's also really good to pick out things that can be made better in somebody's writing. And you might have seen a bit and read part of our story retell and thought, I would have chosen this word, or I think this word would have been better, or why didn't they put that in there? That is great. Because again, if you can do that in our writing, that means that you can look at your own writing when you're editing, and we'll be thinking about editing this week. When you're editing, you'll be able to pick out those things in your own work. So well done if you spotted some room for improvement, some green for growth in our writing as well. Right, let's get back then to today's task and today's writing. First thing I want you to think about is how you are going to present your work today. If you've got some lined paper, that is definitely the best thing to write on today and to work on, okay? Always, when you're doing your English work, and actually any of your work, unless it's maths, you need to be trying to write on lined paper. It's going to help you to get your letters in the right place, to get those ascenders, so those tall parts of the letters that go up in the right place, and to get those descenders under the line in the right place. It's also going to help you to get the sizing of your letters correct. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're really thinking about our letter sizing. So if you've got lined paper, make sure you're working on lined paper. If you haven't got lined paper, don't worry too much. Okay, if you want to work on your laptop today, you want to retell the story on your laptop, or you want to use your tablet, or you want to use your iPad, that is fine as well. Because what we're really looking for this week is the words, your word choices, okay, and the language that you're using and how you retell a story, okay, and all those features that we talked about yesterday and that you picked out of mine and Mrs. Shuttleworth's writing. Okay, date. Top line needs to have today's date on there, please, and we always underline the date using a ruler. And then we misalign. So let's remember our dum-tums. Date, underline, misalign, title, underline, misalign. You haven't got these pictures today, but don't worry about that. If you need the pictures when it comes to doing your writing, you can just go back to this point in the video and you can pause it and it will be there for you to use, okay? Right, a crane for grandma. I've had a go at writing this part of the story and retelling it. I started by thinking I'd write, they pulled grandma out of the roof. I thought, no, it's not interesting enough. Grandma was sticking out of the roof, so they got a crane and pulled her out. No, not detailed enough. So I've thought really, really carefully about how I can retell this first part of the chapter. See what you think. Mr. and Mrs. Cranky stared up at Grandma's enormous head sticking out from the top of the roof. They decided that she just could not stay there, so Mr. Cranky called for a huge, heavy crane to lift her out. Ropes were put under Grandma's long, skinny arms, and she was lifted out like a long piece of spaghetti from a bowl. What do you think? Do you know which bit I really like? I really like the last bit. She was lifted out like a long piece of spaghetti from a bowl, because I looked at the picture and I noticed Grandma's body, and it's all long and thin, and it did remind me of a long piece of spaghetti. And I thought, can you imagine her just dangling from the top of the crane like a piece of spaghetti when it's just about to fall off your fork back into your bowl? So I really, really liked that description. I tried really hard to think about the adjectives that I'm using. So I'm going to highlight this bit, lift it out like a long piece of spaghetti from a bowl. And then I tried to think about the adjectives I've used. So she had an enormous head, because it would have been enormous. What else did I use? Huge, heavy crane. And I wanted to say that it was a huge, heavy crane because I want people to imagine what a really, really big job it must have been to get Grandma out of the roof if it needed a huge heavy crane to lift her out, because you don't imagine huge heavy cranes having to lift grandmas anywhere, do you? Okay. Oh, and her long skinny arms, because that matches with my description of her being lifted out like a long piece of spaghetti from a bowl. I want people to be able to imagine how tall and long and thin Grandma is, because they might not be able to see the picture of her. We can see her picture there, but that doesn't mean that somebody reading my writing can see that picture. So I want to put that picture in their head using good word choices, okay, and by making good word choices. I've also thought very carefully about the verbs that I'm using. So Mr. and Mrs. Cranky, I thought I could have put Mr. and Mrs. Cranky looked up at Grandma's enormous head. I thought I'd use stared instead, because that's like they've been doing it for a long time, just staring and looking at such a very peculiar and amazing sight. Her head was sticking out from the top of the roof, although I did wonder whether poking out from the top of the roof might have been a better verb to use. What do you think? What I might do is, if I go back and edit this work, that might be one of the verbs and one of the words that I choose to change in my writing, because I couldn't decide between sticking out and poking out. I don't know. They decided that she just could not stay there. So I wanted to put, they decided that she just could not stay there. So this just could not just gives a little bit more oomph to my writing. Okay, so they decided that she just could not stay there. It's like absolutely no chance. Okay, so I've made some really careful word choices to talk about what's happening in this very first part of the chapter. Okay, I've tried to think about the verbs I'm using, the adjectives that I'm using. Okay, trying to compare what she looks like to the spaghetti to put a picture in somebody's head. Just noticed as well, I've used a conjunction there. They decided that she just could not stay there, so Mr. Cranky called for a huge, heavy crane to lift her out. Okay, I'm pretty pleased with that. I still think there's some things that could be improved, but that's absolutely fine. All right, so now it's your turn. You're going to retell this chapter. What I don't want you to use is speech. So I don't want there to be lots of characters just talking and saying things to each other all the time. So no speech in your retell, because what tends to happen is that when we start to use speech, we just use speech over and over and over again. And then all that we get is lots of characters just talking to each other. And then we lose what's happening in the story and we forget some of the other things that we need to remember. So no speech. You're retelling the story, what happened in this chapter. Think about that middle picture. There's so much going on there. It's such a funny part of the chapter when she jumps on the back of a giant horse and gallops around the farm, shouting and screaming and up to all kinds of mischief. So that should be a really funny part of your chapter that makes people laugh. And then the part at the end where she's sleeping in the hay barn, you might want to make a comment at the end about serves her right for being so mean. It's up to you. Okay, I'm really looking forward to reading your retell of this part of the story. Okay, if you need to remind yourself about what happens in this part of the story, go back to either your own book if you've been reading along with me, or go back and listen to me reading the chapter. All right, brilliant. Work hard, year 2. I cannot wait to read these chapter retells.